know it's very difficult for our speakers. Each one could give an unbelievable lecture in an hour, but we want to make sure that we have time for your questions. So I would jot down your questions as we go along to make sure that you don't forget them as we go on. Our next speaker is Danny Seidman. I know many of you know him. He is the expert on East Jerusalem. There is no one walking this earth that knows as much about East Jerusalem as Danny Seidman, and his information is used by the international press, the Israeli government, our government. He's currently the founder and director of an Israeli nonprofit called Terrestrial Jerusalem. And I would ask Danny the same question, but from the perspective of Jerusalem. Does settlement expansion in East Jerusalem prevent the possibility of two states?
Thank you, Deborah. Good morning. It's been 13 years since I worked with the American negotiating team in our Prime Minister's office on how to politically divide Jerusalem. That was new. Until then, the mantra of Jerusalem, the undivided capital of Israel, that will never be redivided, which is one word and a noun, that was held sway, and Jerusalem lost its virginity, was deflowered at Camp David. In the 13 years since then, I've been coming to this town, and whenever I run into the old crowd, the American negotiating people like Rob Malney, Aaron Miller, the first question is always the same. Danny, is it still there? That's code. And what they're asking me is it still possible to create a credible border that will carve out a viable Palestinian city in East Jerusalem, leaving a robust Israeli capital in its wake? Or has the map that we've seen here become so balkanized that that is no longer possible? Now, I'm usually the Cassandra of the peace process, bringing always bad news, but I came for the last 10, 11, 12 years and said, you know, it's more difficult, but it's not more difficult by a greater order of magnitude than it was in the summer of 2000. And that's very much Yari's message. But then about 2 years ago, my message began to change. We were in the midst of an unprecedented surge in settlement activities, unprecedented since 1967 by objective benchmarks. We were hemorrhaging settlements. And I began to see that we were about to lose the possibility of a two-state solution, if not irrevocably now and for the foreseeable future. The map would be so balkanized, demographically and geographically, that to draw a political boundary on that map would no longer be possible. Now, that's not good enough to say, I think we're losing it. So we sat down and we did a specific exercise. We know every plan that's being worked on, we know the pace, we know the numbers, we know where it's located, and we projected what a map would look like, this is about a year and a half ago, at the end of 2013, at the end of this year. And what we saw was not random. It was a credible, coherent, unilateral border between Israel and so-called Palestine, which was thoroughly incompatible with the two-state solution, because it would so fragment the Palestinian entity, transforming it into Bantustans and cantons, it would be incompatible with this two-state solution. We took it to the White House, and in a meeting that I had with Lara in the White House, probably the worst of my professional career as well, we showed our materials to the person in charge of the White House, and he said, you know, Dan, we see what you're saying, and you know, you're probably right. By the end of 2013, the two-state solution will probably be gone, and you know what happens the following day? The sun will rise, life will go on, better for some, not so good for others. Here we are, Israel, in the midst of hemorrhaging settlements. We're about to lose the two-state solution. There's a semi-vulgar quip in Hebrew. Everybody pisses in the swimming pool, not everybody does it from the diving board. Netanyahu, when it came to settlements, was doing it from the high board, and what we're hearing from Washington is, hey, there's a light rain. That meant that we are holding on by our fingernails to the two-state solution. On December 31st, I received remarkable validation of this. I went out and around with a very senior Israeli military official responsible directly for settlement activities and virtually everything else in the West Bank. I want to very briefly describe the dialogue that took place. I presented my thesis to him, saying that I think what you're doing is creating a baseline border between Israel and so-called Palestine that's going to destroy the two-state solution. He says, oh, and I expected pushback. The guy said, oh, yeah, that's what we're doing. We call it spatial shaping. Now, until then, I thought spatial shaping was the name of an interior design firm in San Francisco. Now I know it's a euphemism for destroying the two-state solution. Then he says to me, Danny, you know, what you're describing is only a problem if you're stuck in the paradigm of an agreed settlement with the Palestinians. Nobody in this government anticipates an agreed settlement with the Palestinians. So, well, I said to him, you know what you're doing is destroying the two-state solution. He says, oh, here I disagree with you, he says to me. This is the two-state solution as perceived by a duly elected Prime Minister of Israel. I said, excuse me, but I asked him, are you aware that nobody else on the planet except Pastor Hagee and the likes of him will recognize this as a state? We have no anticipation of receiving third-party consent. This is what we're doing. Finally, I said to him, look, you are far more familiar than I am with the machinations of Israeli policies in the West Bank, but I probably meet with heads of state and foreign ministers more than you do. Are you aware of how much anger, how much isolation there is in this for Israel? Should we pursue these policies, we're not going to convince our closest allies. His response was, America is in decline, Europe doesn't count, we should be able to handle it. That is where we were going until the beginning of this year, and then something surprising happened. John Kerry showed up. And in testimony before Congress in May, Secretary Kerry said, we have a year and a half, or 2 years before we lose the two-state solution. I see that as a signal that in this town, the period of denial is over. That means that Secretary Kerry and President Obama may fail, but they will be failing with their eyes wide open. In addition to that, against all odds, Secretary Kerry has been able to elicit from Israel to a large extent a de facto settlement freeze that has made me freeze the clock almost entirely until August, and since August it's begun to tick again. That means that by the end of 2013 we still have a two-state solution, but should Secretary Kerry's effort fail, we know what happens next. The floodgates open. We know where where the settlements will take place. We know where it will be happening. That's the pattern. As a result of that, we are witnessing a drama of biblical proportions. The Kerry effort is not just another initiative. If it fails, you go back to the drawing boards. It is not elective surgery. It is a life-saving procedure if the two-state solution is going to remain viable. That means that I fully endorse and encourage the J Street effort, APN's effort to engage on two states. This is not a drill. It's not a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is the real thing. Every effort has to be made to guarantee the success of this administration's initiative, because if they fail, the implications of that are unthinkable. That means back the administration, create the breathing space, engage the American Jewish community, engage the administration, engage Israel, and if you have spare time, tuck Secretary Kerry in at night and make sure he doesn't catch cold, because Secretary Kerry is the last best hope of the two-state solution.